Great. So welcome to this racial healing workshop about reconciling trauma in the body with trauma in the land. Our guest facilitator today is Brenda Salgado, who is the director of the Racial Healing Initiative and someone that I partner closely with to help that initiative make it out to retreat centers across the U.S. So I'm glad that you're all here. We've done several racial healing workshops, maybe almost a dozen now, over the course of the last year and a half. And I see some members of our team on the call here today. So welcome Lauren and Marissa, who are also on the Racial Healing Initiative team. This work is really important to me in that it's helping retreat centers find new ways to serve and new ways to examine their own practices and organizational cultures and ways of holding the work of retreat to expand that and allow more folks to belong to that work. So I'm excited to be a part of this and to have this team around me to help bring this to retreat centers, and really grateful for Brenda's leadership and vision for this kind of work, and really excited to see how we can bring this conversation forward together. Over the course of the past racial healing workshops, a lot of it has been about getting on the same page with each other. What does this mean for retreat centers? What does this mean for our work? And sometimes not knowing if we're speaking the same language. I think we're all in different geographic regions. We're working in different kinds of organizations of different sizes with different challenges. So there's a lot of variation among our different centers, but also a lot of shared needs. And so opportunities like this to look at trauma really apply to so many different settings. So I'm glad that we're able to have Brenda along to lead us in that. I'm the program director for the Retreat Center collaboration. So if you have questions about community calls like this or how you can get involved in other ways with the Retreat Center collaboration, I welcome you to email me or private message me in this meeting. My colleague Erin McCauley is the admin assistant at RCC and is recording the call and taking notes. So if you want to see some notes afterwards, we'll be posting those to our blogs. There are other ways to engage with this material down the road. But for right now, I'll pass it over to Brenda.
Well, hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well where you are. I've been giving a lot of thanks to the elemental beings of air because we've had some really beautiful rains and strong winds this morning, and our power was out for most of the morning. And I was just like, thank you for all your clearing away for us. And please come back online before 10:30 Pacific time. And about 10 minutes before this call started, boom, all the power came back on. So I'm very, very grateful for my ability to be with you today and not have my power out and my Wi-Fi down. So a lot of gratitude and grateful for the rains, even though we've had a lot of havoc in California. I also know we need the water, so I'm grateful for that clearing too. Grateful to be here with you this morning. This probably may feel a little different than some of the other webinars because I'll probably lead it a little bit different as an Indigenous person. Sharing story and being heart connected is really important to us. Whenever we do things with other people, we have to be in relationship first. Yeah, no, I don't think of it as bad weather at all. Thanks for saying that, Sonia. I think that all weather is sacred and all weather is coming to teach us things. It's one of the gifts of being taught by a lot of Indigenous teachers. One of my first teachers, who's an elder in Xochimilco, Mexico, one of the things she said was, on a day like today where it's really windy, it's a good day to go up into the mountain and send your love to the wind beings, and then to ask them to carry away things you don't need anymore and to yell them out into the wind. Like that today is an opportunity for clearing and release, like powerful energies. And then another time that came up, Sonia, was when I was doing a commencement address at Naropa University many years ago, about 7 years ago. I was having dinner with a dear friend, or tea with a dear friend. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this thunderstorm came and it was like raining and whipping things around. And everybody in the tea place we were at was panicking and running out of there and saying, like, oh, I didn't bring an umbrella and I'm going to get wet. And just a lot of kind of chaos as people were freaking out about the weather. And he and I were both talking about like the different beings and different traditions. He said, I think the thunder beings are coming right the night before your talk because the thunder beings are wanting you to clear the air and speak some truth and justice. He's like, so I'm thinking, so he's thinking of both Orisha and other indigenous ways of thinking about the thunder beings as powerful beings that bring truth and change. And he said, I think that they're just welcoming you here. So yeah, there's always this interesting way to think about things, not as good or bad, but as just different powers and energies. So thank you for that. Yeah. Um, so I'm going to start by sharing an image. Hopefully I can do this well. Dun, dun, dun. All right, perfect. Let's see if this works. Woohoo, yay. I love technology. So I'm going to introduce myself the way that I've been taught to introduce myself by many of my indigenous elders. So we always start by honoring who and where we come from. It's a very Western thing to ask, what do you do for a living? It's in a lot of other places I travel and where my parents were raised. The question is usually more, who are your people and where do you come from? Because that's rooting you and grounding you in place and in ancestry. And so I'll share from that place first. So my name is Brenda Salgado. I'm the daughter of Carlos and Esmeralda Salgado, who are in that center there. My parents are both in their mid 80s and still alive. And I'm very grateful that they're only about a half hour away from me. And they were both born and raised in Nicaragua and then came to San Francisco back in the 50s and were married here. So the three of us were all raised here, me, my brother, and my sister. So I'm also sister to Carlos and Debbie, and I'm the youngest of the three. The baby, as my mama likes to call me, the baby of the family. And then their parents on the right, my maternal grandparents, Maria and Arnoldo, carried a lot of indigenous Chorotega lineage, especially my grandmother on my mom's side. Was a medicine person as well and a healer and very connected, and really loved that she had a beautiful way of braiding both her Catholic upbringing and going to Catholic church and going to church regularly, but also embracing her indigenous teachings and medicine and gifts in her line. So she didn't have conflict with them, and that helps me to hold it that way as well. And then on my dad's side, Felipe and Mariana, really wonderful beings. I only met Mariana. Felipe did not raise my father, so I didn't ever meet him in the flesh, but we actually have a beautiful heartfelt connection now, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I'm grateful to all my grandparents who are of mixed indigenous and Spanish ancestry, and probably some other things in there that I don't know about. Because we don't always know all the stories of our ancestors. But I'm grateful to them and grateful for their support in doing healing with the different ancestral lines, but also how tied that is to our relationship to the land, both here where I grew up and then also in Nicaragua. So I'll be sharing a little bit more about that. Also really grateful to the ocean, the trees, the mountains surrounding Daly City, California, which is unceded Ohlone lands. That's where I grew up. I now live in San Leandro, about a half hour away from there, which are also Ohlone lands. And grateful to be in relationship with the Ohlone peoples here as friends and partners in the work. And then also just really want to name and honor the lands surrounding Volcan Masaya in Nicaragua. So that's indigenous Chorotega lands. And that's where both my mom and dad grew up. They spent a lot of time in small villages surrounding that volcano. And that's how they got to know each other as young people. They had a lot of family and friends in common in these small villages. And so they grew up knowing each other. And dad fell in love with mom. Was very shy about saying that until he got to the US and started writing to her. So I'm grateful for those lands because they still hold a lot of kind of relationship to deeply ancestral relationship with land. So I'm grateful, especially for my grandma on my mom's side, because I see her lineage as one who's never lost relationship to land and plants and medicine. I think that there's a lot of medicine that some of my European ancestors had too, but because of breaking relationship with ancestors and place, some of that got lost along the way. And I know that factored into some of their trauma and ungroundedness and unrootedness. So grateful for all the ways that we're healing that together. So I'm going to stop the share. And go back to gallery view. And so I'm going to invite folks just to share briefly, because this is, I really can't do work with folks unless we're like sharing together. I would love to have folks share briefly your name, the land you're on now, and if you know the indigenous name of the land, the peoples there, that'd be great to share that. If you don't, we can share a link in the chat later about how to look that up. But if you could share a little bit about who you are, who your parents, the name of your parents and where they were from, if you know, and then where you are now on land, just to honor who and where you're coming from. It'd be lovely to have people share. And that'll root us together in some of the work. And it can go in any order.
I'm happy to go.
Thank you.
It's afternoon for me. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Buck. I am Zooming from St. Louis, Missouri, land of the Kickapoo, Miami, and Osage people. My parents, Robert and Joyce Buck.
Thank you for bringing them in.
My name is Sonia, and she, her, and I am on traditional ancestral Cherokee land in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And my parents, Ned and Françoise, so I'm French on my mother's side, and Jewish on both sides, with very different stories about my lineage on the two sides of my family. And it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Sveiks, everyone. My name is Larissa. So glad to be here with you. I honor my mother's line. Her people are from Latvia, Larissa Ruta Elma Augusta Zanic, and my father's line, Donald and Helen. And dialing in today from the Nisqually lands, Squaliapsh in the language of Lushootseed in these places, and lifting up another ancestor, a dear uncle in our family, Billy Frank, and the people who came together for what's become known as the Fish Wars in this particular part of the Northwest, sometimes we call it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, and some folks are sharing in the chat because they're not able to speak out loud where they are, or that just may be their more preferred way of sharing, and that's okay if you prefer to share in the chat versus verbal. Both are welcome and accepted here.
I'll go. Hello, everyone. Maureen Connors. I'm coming to you from a little city called Pinellas Park between St. Petersburg and Clearwater, Florida. And I'm on the Tobago and Seminole lands here. And my father, Ed, was fully Irish. My mother, Celeste, was Irish and French. So I'm 3/4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim Zarilla, zooming in from Wabanaki land out in western Massachusetts, son of Pam and Paul Zarilla, who come from Slavic and Italian ancestry. Great to be here.
Hi, I'm Anne. I'm calling in from California. We are on the Ohlone land, and my parents were Julie and Bob, and they were both from a variety of ancestry from Western Europe, particularly Dutch.
Good morning. I'll follow Anne, also part of a Mount Madonna contingent on Ohlone land. My name's Tobias. My Sanskrit name is Mohan. 3 of my grandparents are of Northern European descent, and then my paternal grandfather is from Mexico.
go next. I'm also with the Mount Madonna group. I'm Jen. I'm in Santa Cruz, which I believe is also Ohlone land. And my parents are Joan and Carl, both born in Wisconsin, German on my father's side and Hungarian on my mother's side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Anderson from Siena Retreat Center, which is on ancestral Potawatomi land. And my parents are from Celtic and Slavic lineage, and they are from Southern California and Southern Washington state. So that would be, I believe, either the Tongva people in Southern California. And I'm not sure what the indigenous land identification would be, or the ancestral people around my dad's area, but it'd be Southern Washington and around the Longview Kelso area.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kirsten. I'm with Gilchrist Retreat Center on the traditional lands of the Potawatomi, Pokagon Band of Potawatomi. And my parents are Jack and Cindy, and my lineage is a long agricultural lineage running through what is now the south suburbs of Chicago to the Netherlands.
Beautiful, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamie. I am in Little Falls, Minnesota, on the lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. And my parents are Dick and Marilyn from Celtic and Austrian roots.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marta. I'm coming to you from the Whidbey Institute, Whidbey Island, lands of the Lower Skagit, Stillaguamish, the Tulalip, the Post Salish peoples. And my father's family, James, is from Ireland and Scotland, and my mother's family, Marilyn, is from Czechoslovakia and Lithuania.
Thank you. Give another second to see if there's anyone else who wants to share. I know that some of you may not be able to for different reasons, but just want to make sure there's space for everyone's voice.
I can chime in and share that I'm the son of Phil and Val, that I'm on Anishinaabe land here in Western Michigan. My dad's family came to South Dakota several generations ago on the land of the Sioux. And my mother's family has been a mystery, but recently learned more and more about the Celtic and Nordic roots of that family as well. So German, all around the Baltic Sea there. Nice to be with you all.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I'll share too. My name's Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm in Michigan, not too far from Ben, actually, so also on the same Anishinaabe land. My parents are Frank and Sharon, and we come from Celtic roots.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I offer up a little bit of mugwort, which was sacred medicine of Europe, is still sacred medicine of Europe, that is known for helping us connect with ancestors in the dream time. So honoring that all of our ancestors at some point, if we look far back enough, were indigenous to place, had relationship to land, had relationship to the plants in the area, a little bit of cedar, which we also offer for ancestors. And just honoring all the beings that you named, because they dreamt you into being, made you possible, that you're part of a lineage. And sometimes we don't know the names of all of our ancestors. And sometimes those things got lost. We don't always know the peoples they came from, if they've been here many, many generations. And then a lot of times if we're adopted, we don't always know who those biological ancestors are. And we have both biological family as well as chosen family that for whatever reason, spirit or the universe brought us to be with certain families for other reasons. We may not always know why, and that may have been part of our unfolding in our own path and our own gifts on this planet. So we want to give thanks to all of those. I want to give thanks also because all of you probably come from different spiritual lineages as well. So I want to honor the spiritual ancestors and teachers that have shaped you, that are both part of your family lines, as well as ones that, again, were chosen for different reasons on your path, that they're all part of helping us be who we are today and support the work that we're doing in the world. Thank you. Thank you. So Indigenous folks like to share a lot through stories. I'll probably be doing a little bit of that, and then some opportunities maybe for people to be in small groups and to share too. A couple stories to share that feel important around this particular topic. One is kind of like a personal story. At the time that Occupy Oakland was going on, I had a lot of friends that were involved in that here in Oakland. And it was very interesting to me when one day I'd had this dream that I needed to bring an ancestor message to Occupy Oakland. And so when I woke up, I wrote all those things down. And I went into my office. At the time I was working at Movement Strategy Center in Oakland, so this is a while back. And I was wanting to go talk to my boss there, Taj James, about this dream that I had and that I needed to come and offer this message from the ancestors. And when I got there, he was sitting with a native elder named Nia Tran. And Nia Tran had a dream the night before that he needed to go and talk to Taj. So that was funny because they hadn't seen each other for a while. And they were talking. And when I came in, Taj said, "Come over here. I think you're supposed to be part of this conversation." And I told them about the dream, and Nia told me about his dream. He's like, "This is all connected." And so I shared some of the things I was supposed to share there. And he said, "Oh, you know, this is really important how you do this." He said, there's a lot of kind of young anarchist people who are at the center of that Occupy thing, and they're really well-intentioned, but they have lost their relationship of the 7 generations that you and I understand. They've lost their relationship with land and place and their ancestors' land. He said, so how you deliver this message is really important. And he said, I'm going to ask you to invite a Native woman with a child, with children, to stand in front of you and deliver a part of the message. And she'll be standing in front of you. And he said, do you know this particular person? And I said, I do. She's a good friend. And he said, okay, you should invite Morningstar to do that with her children. And I said, okay, I'll reach out to her. And then he said, you should deliver this part of the message. And then he said, do you know Patricia St. Onge and Wilson Royals in Oakland? I said, I do. They're really good friends and elders of mine. And he said, they should be holding this part of the message. He said, it's important that they see kind of the intergenerational in its physical form, because so many of them have been hurt by the trauma in their lives and they've broken relationship with their elders. So it's not just the content of the message, it's how you deliver it energetically. It will be different for them if you do it this way. And so it's really sweet, but both of them were available, and, you know, and they showed up and we delivered that message together. So that was a really big lesson for me around kind of, you know, remembering how, not just what we say or the content of what we say, but how we deliver it energetically, how we deliver it in a way that feels shared across generations. I saw that a lot at Standing Rock too, just how you had elders holding certain roles, you had young people holding certain roles. And that was a very powerful thing to experience too, because one of my friends who, several of us went when they called for spiritual leaders to come. So about 500 of us show up. I think they were not expecting that many of us. But one of the other spiritual elders who was there with me, Liza Renka, who I love very dearly, she told me that she had heard from some young people when they were leaving Standing Rock sometime later that they were in tears and really emotional. And she said, "What's going on for you guys?" And they said, "You know, I'm grateful to have been here to fight for something I really care about. But I've been kind of visioning this world of social justice and everyone belonging and healing with each other in the land. And I feel like I've been in all these social justice spaces that talk about it, but this is the first time I've felt it embodied in my body and across these generations and across racial difference and all these things." And they were crying because they didn't want to go home. I said, "I'm going to go home to places where we talk about this, but we don't do it. And I don't want to leave." And so that's the thing, you know, to carry in all of our sacred work, and the work that Racial Healing Initiative is trying to do is to bring these, not just the intellectual conversation of diversity, inclusion, racial healing, but getting it to this embodied place in our bodies where we're doing the work of healing with the land, healing with the ancestors, because we can't get there just in the intellectual space. And it really is about being in relationship with each other, being in relationship with the land again. And if for whatever reason our lineages have lost those things, we need a little help returning to that. That's all. You know, it's not a bad thing, and it can be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's a blessing to be able to do that with others. So really in that place of understanding from a lot of my elders that we're in a time of great prophecy. There's one prophecy of the eagle and the condor that I wanted to share with you all. If you haven't heard of it, some of you may have. But many, many years ago, indigenous elders gathered back in the 90s in South America, and they were sharing about how they all have these kind of larger cosmic calendars and understandings of cycles of life and shifts in consciousness on the planet. And so one of the prophecies was from the folks from South America is that prior to colonization, we're all meant to be balanced human beings, regardless what our gender is. And they said we were taught that you had to cultivate the wing of the eagle and the wing of the condor to fly as a balanced human being. And one is of kind of compassion, love, intuition, connection with the earth, qualities that some traditions might consider more feminine, but others might have more yin yang. Doesn't always, it's not about gender as much as it is cultivating the heart and the intuition and the love, the connection with the earth, the more mystic ways of being, the more contemplative ways of being that many of you know through your retreat centers, being with the earth in a respectful way and not a domination way. And then the wing of the eagle is one of intellect, of doing here in the physical realm, of accomplishing things, which is also very important, right? But having thoughts in alignment with the path that we're on and our purpose in the world, and bringing things into the physical realm, making things happen. And also, and if you think about kind of the balance of those things, what they said was, any being in our community would have to cultivate both wings in order to fly in balance, and therefore they're operating primarily from their heart, which is an integration of the two. They said at one point that there were people who had killed and demonized their own medicine folks, their own relationship with the land. And for that reason, we're flying out of balance. We're very, very eagle and had atrophied their condor wing. And that they were also spreading that kind of imbalance around the planet at that time. And that there'd be 500 years under which a lot of this medicine, condor medicine, would have to go underground and not be shared because it would be very, very dangerous. And then after 500 years time, we'd be in a time where we're in one of these big cosmic shifts, where it was safe for those things to come back out to help people remember their own condor medicine and reclaim that relationship with land and ancestors, and that we could come back into the medicine hoop of humanity, that we're all part of one family, and that we've lost the ability to be in that way together. And part of that is reclaiming the condor medicine, reclaiming that relationship with ancestors and land. That's medicine that's really urgent in these times. And so that's one of the things that's been really important. The other thing around that prophecy, which I find really fascinating, is that back in the 90s, these elders from North Central South America gathered in South America, and they were talking about all these prophecies, and this time in the calendar was coming. They knew it by different names, but they knew it was coming. And that we needed to start to be in prayer and ceremony around that. So all of humanity could come back into this medicine around relationship with land and each other and ancestors. And so they began running every 4 years to do ceremony and prayer together, where they would start running from the top of Alaska on the Eagle Route, and then running from South America on the Condor Route. It would take 6 or 7 months to run that whole thing. And we're, folks are doing prayer and ceremony with indigenous communities to remember their peace and dignity and to bring that medicine forward. And they're carrying staffs for those communities. And they're bringing all these prayers together. And at the end, they meet somewhere in the middle and they're doing ceremony for a week with hundreds of staffs of all the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And all of this is a prayer for those tribes, but it's also a prayer for humanity to come back into our wholeness together. So that's been going on every 4 years since 1992. And very grateful to my grandma because she came to me. She died when I was young, but she's a very active ancestor who talks to me a lot and guides me a lot. I feel like I have a deeper relationship with her in this time than when she was alive, because she was in Nicaragua when I was raised in California. So I met her a handful of times, but really like our connection really began when I started doing ancestor ceremony and asking for more guidance. So grateful because she's very active that way. But she did ask me to go in 2012. She said, it's really important to me that you're in Nicaragua for this ceremony, that you're supporting the indigenous peoples who are leading it, that you're fundraising for them, doing whatever they need. And so it was a big blessing to be there and doing some of that healing work. I do ancestor work here, and it was also beautiful to be able to do that in the land of my ancestors. And she continues to guide that process. So I won't share too much about that because that's a deeper conversation, but I am really grateful because those ceremonies have been going on for quite a while. Unfortunately, in 2020 it was canceled, which COVID. So we'll see what happens in 2024. Hopefully we'll be back on the road running again. But I know that even you speaking out the name of your ancestors, and for those of you who know what their lineage was, that's a prayer and a blessing to them wherever they are, to be acknowledged in that way. It's really, really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us. So one of the things we did at Occupy Oakland, which was really interesting, was talk about like what are our earliest memories. And this is something I think that's a good thing to journal about. One of the things we did was talk with some of the elders around what does it mean to decolonize our relationship to land. And I think this came up because Albuquerque, New Mexico, they changed their language from Occupy Albuquerque to decolonize Albuquerque. And I think they were one of the only ones that did that. But there were young people here who want to do the same thing in Oakland. And part of that is to understand that for indigenous peoples, the word occupy is not a liberatory term. Occupation has been happening on these lands for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so I think that's part of why that happened in Albuquerque. But when the young people were wanting to do that here in Oakland, a lot of the indigenous elders said, we understand your intention, but a lot of education and conversation has to happen before we even ask to change the name, because people don't know what that term means to you and why we're asking for it. And so some of that has to be done in relationship and conversation. And the young folks said, we want to do it anyway. And I remember the elders saying, we don't think the energy is and the conversation that needs to set that foundation is there yet, but because you're young folks and you're leading, we want to support you. And I remember that day where they brought the conversation to that site, and a lot of people kind of arguing, and it didn't pass. And then as a result of that, the elders said, let's do a teach-in to talk about some of these things. And what I loved about what they came up together was they did a series of talking about indigenous views about relationship to land. And then they had people just get in small groups and share and reflect on, like, what are your earliest memories about relationship to land? What were you taught implicitly and explicitly about relationship to land? whether that was about domination or control, or whether that was about fear and being scared of the wilderness. So many different things, right? And so I'm going to invite folks into, and hopefully we can put people in small groups. If we could put folks in small groups for, let's see, if we do groups of 3 and we give everybody 2 minutes, that would be lovely. That work out, Erin? And then let's put in the chat a little bit about those questions.
Are you setting up rooms, Ben, or would you like me to do that?
When she said Erin, I was like, I'm going to hold back.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, I got him.
Okay.
I can do it. Yeah. So I have a couple groups of 4, but mostly groups of 3. Brenda, do you want to hop in on these too?
Sure.
And I will move.
I'm copying the question here real quick.
And how many minutes would you like to spend?
If we have 4, let's say 8 minutes. And I'm going to invite folks to be mindful of sharing the space so that everybody gets 2 minutes. If you're in a group of 4, if you're in a group of 3, probably 2 to 2.5 minutes. So you share the space well.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, great.
All right, here we go.
Thank you for taking the time to be in this conversation with each other. There's so many things we're implicitly or explicitly taught about our relationship with land, and sometimes just taking time to think about what that might be is helpful to us. So I want to share more story at this point, which will kind of lead into our next breakout. I want to share a little bit story as someone who's always been kind of in conversation with land. I'm very grateful that the land is always speaking to me and that ancestors are always speaking to me. That wasn't something that my brother and sister got for whatever reason, but it is something that I got and was part of my purpose in this lifetime. That's one of the things my grandma told me quite young, that your purpose is around land healing and healing people and helping to bring about this time of shift. So I'll share kind of in a broad space and then kind of more specifically about my own experience within that context. The other important thing that has been shared with me, bye Tim, it's good to see you. The other thing that was shared with me by one of my teachers, particularly in the Toltec lineage, was that there are all these cycles and calendars that we have. And one of them is about big cycles that are 6,625 years long. And we're in one of those transitions now as humanity. And they said, what our elders have taught us is that this time of the 5th sun that we've been in has been a time of separation for many, many people from their spirit, from their sense of source, their relationship with the land. It's also been marked by a lot of patriarchy and racism, a lot of war language, a lot of us versus them, that separation, again, taking many, many different forms. And that we're closing that time of the sun right now, and we're opening the time of the 6th sun. And these transitions take many years. It's not like they're like a light switch and they flip all at once. It's a gradual shift. But the time of the 6th sun that we're entering, the way we talk about it in the Toltec is about coming into our Quetzalcoatl nature, that remembrance of our eagle and our condor, and operating from our heart and operating in a loving relational way with the earth and with cosmos, with the universe, with God, remembering our relationship and responsibility to the ancestors who came before and the 7 generations yet to come, that were part of these lineages of the sacred above and below, as well as those who came before and after. And all of that's centered in our heart area. And what I really love about the teachers I've had is they've been really clear, don't be fundamentalist about any of it, because what we call coming into our Quetzalcoatl nature. Others might call coming into Buddha nature or into your Christ consciousness or your unity consciousness. He said, if you connect with people of different mystical traditions, they have a lot less conflict than folks talking about theology, because it's about the dropping in that direct relationship with source and remembering the truth of who we are and our capacity to co-create with the universe and earth when we're in that right relationship. And so that's the time that we're entering now. And one of the things that Grandma shared with me a long time ago when I was little was like, you came here to be a healer, a ceremony person, but not just at a human individual level, but across race, across land, you know, all these things that need to be healed in this time of shift. And that's the time that we're in now. So that feels really like such a joy for me. And also the bigger piece, I think, about the indigenous worldview is I know I'm not doing it alone. I don't do anything alone. I'm asking permission of the earth. I'm asking permission of the universe. I'm asking for my ancestors to help me. And I'm asking future generations for what they're wanting us to do in this time to create a better future for them. And so if I'm in connection with my human relatives and I'm in connection with all these non-human relatives, then everything is possible. But when I try to do things by myself, it feels really hard. And so I'm really grateful for that, those kinds of teachings that I've been given, that like if you're in right relationship with land, with ancestors, there's a lot more possible. And it's particularly that this time, our ability to go into the time of the sixth sun and to be in our sacred purpose, that this is the time where we really do have to do the land healing and the ancestral healing if we're going to fulfill that our divine purpose in the world. And so a lot of my elders talk about how a lot of us came here to be in service in this time, in this particular way, to be the ones who turned backwards and healed those relationships, as hard as it may feel at times, but that it's part of our service to humanity and future generations to do this work. And as people who are working at retreat centers and giving people access to personal development and healing, and to access to natural spaces to slow down and go within, that you're in some ways have a great capacity to be part of that larger purpose of transformation for the collective. That it's not just an individual pursuit of individual healing, but it's something much, much greater than that. And that there's so many beings in the non-human realms that are cheering us on in this work and excited that we're doing this work, even when it feels difficult and challenging, that it also brings great beauty. So I want to share another story. And this story is more about a set of trees that have been talking to me for a long time, and that I'm really grateful to. So many years ago, again, when I was at Movement Strategy Center, I was driving home every day, and I would be driving along this highway and I'd see this beautiful set of trees that I could see from the freeway. And they would talk to me all the time and say, you know, you need to come up here and you need to do sunrise ceremony. And I'd say, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're on private property. I feel like I need to be careful. And so at that time, I heard that message over and over again. So at some point, because I'd heard it and had been leading a lot of sunrise ceremony around solstices and equinoxes, I felt like I really needed to be obedient. One of the people in my moon circle talks to me a lot and says, you're one of the people I know that's most obedient to spirit and ancestors. So I really appreciate that she says that. Yeah. And so I went up there, got up in the dark, went up to the trees, drummed, made offerings to the land, sang to the land, as I've been taught to do as one of my offerings. And then I said, why did you call me up here? And the message that I got was that there's a lot of work you have to do. One, you have to start a moon circle that gathers women in circle. You need to do ceremonies around the equinox and solstice for community. They also told me I needed to leave my job, which was largely movement building and bringing transformative and spiritual practice into movement building work. But they said you came to be here to be a teacher and a healer this time. So that needs to be your primary purpose as we're approaching this time in the calendar. And then also that there was this land that needed healing there. and wanted to be stewarded in a different way. So that was, they said, it's not here, it's not ready yet, but just wait, be patient. It's land that you and others will steward and will become a healing place and talk about all these shifts that are happening on the planet. And it will do so in a way that transcends any one tradition and helps people remember that relationship with land and ancestors again. So I didn't think about it too much. And then some years later, when I was the director at East Bay Meditation Center, and when I left that position about a month after that, I got a message that the land was available for the first time in 100 years. And I looked online, and I saw that this 58-acre parcel was available. And we still are not stewarding it, or it's not in land trust yet. But at the time, the land was very clear with me. I went up to the top of the property. I made a bunch of offerings of cedar, tobacco, saying to the land, I said, you know, I hear you asking that you want a group of women to steward this land. And the land said, I'm not ready yet. I was a rock quarry for over 100 years. A lot of harm happened to this land, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering to the land. And they said, you know, we're going to need a lot of healing ceremony for several years before I can become the healing space I want to be. And so the women have been doing ceremony to clear some of that heavy karma, heavy energy on the land for many, many years. And just being obedient to what the land is asking for. Wanted pipe ceremony, wanted spring equinox ceremony, you know, and all the equinoxes and solstices for several years, and that would help. So we've just been doing whatever's asked of us and making offerings on the land in different ways. And then it really was just last year that the land said, thank you, appreciate that, starting to feel back to my old self from all that heaviness that happened for hundreds and hundreds of years here. And there's some preparation you have to do, and the Women's Circle has to do before you start a land trust and get this land. And you'll understand more in a moment, you know, about why they wanted that. So in the Toltec, our understanding around contracts with the earth, with the universe, with spirit, is that there's some things that happen in the spiritual realms, energetic realms that have to precede things here in the physical realm. And so one of the things they said to me was, there are some ancestors on your father's side who did some really heavy, difficult, violent things on the land in Nicaragua. And that's causing a lot of harm to the people who live there now, because this karma, this energy sits on land, and people don't always understand that. And so they said, because you've been clearing the karma of the Lee family on this land, which was a rock quarry, and then because you were also clearing a lot of heavy karma of the Falcon family on this other property where your circle met, and you've been helping to clear all that heaviness as a circle of women, we want to support you to clear the karma in Nicaragua that some of your father's uncles did. And they said the reason this is so important is I was praying for quite a while, like if I'm stepping into this role as RHI director and holding space for some of that work, and you're also asking the Women's Circle to steward this land, I was praying to my ancestors. I said, somewhere back there in my lineage, I'm certain that there were beings who were good stewards and who listened to the land and were in partnership with the land, not in domination over the land. And so I would like those ancestors to assist me and to support me on this path. And that's what they said. They said, well, one great grandfather, Fidelmo, said, I was stewarding a large piece of land, and I was a good steward of land, not just for myself, but other people. But when I died, my sons betrayed that and did a lot of harm on land after I left. And I want to come help you, but you need to help me clear this karma on the land. And a lot of grief came through my body when those messages came through, and in the ceremony that we did to clear some of that karma on the land. And then the other ceremony that was requested was a ceremony to help honor the land where we're supposed to steward, directly following that ceremony. And so the importance of doing these kinds of ceremonies in community, not just as individuals, but in community, the land was very clear with me, like, you got to help people understand those things. And this has been such a long journey for me. I feel like my first indigenous teachers, their first lessons to me were just like, whenever I go somewhere, They said, whenever you travel anywhere, the first thing you need to do is set up your altar in your room and clear your energy in your room, because there were people there before you and you don't know who or what they were. And it's not a judgment of them. It's just a being in sovereignty and responsibility around energy. And then you need to go out to the land and find a tree that speaks to you and offer some cedar, some tobacco, whatever, and a song. So I've been taught different songs to sing to the different elements and to the land. And after you make these offerings, to ask permission to be there in a good way, to ask for guidance and protection while you're there, to be of highest purpose. Ask permission of the ancestors of that place, the different guardians who have been there over time that still watch over that place. Ask their permission and guidance. And they said, everything will go much more smoothly for you if you do these things. And so that's just my nature everywhere I go now, is I make these offerings and I ask permission. And then what I find is a lot of times, like the trees where I'm going for the first time say to me like things like, oh, we knew you were coming because the trees where you were told us you were coming. And they told us you're one who has good relationship with land and trees. And so welcome, we want to support you. And so in that sense, I never feel afraid or alone no matter where I go, because I'm like cluing into the grid there. And those are the earliest, I think, teachings I've gotten about relationship with land. And I invite you to think about that. If it's not something you do where you are there kind of places you might create an earth altar outside where you can make those kinds of offerings, and just to say hello to the land and say, I want to be in partnership and relationship with you. One of the things that the land here has said to me over and over again, they said, it's important to help people kind of explore and experiment and remember these relationships, because they said, whether it's domination for a rock quarry or domination for a healing center, if it's not in relationship with the land, it's still a relationship of domination. And so what I'd like to do is invite folks to go into small groups and to think about if there's things that you already do, what are ways that you honor the land where you are now? Also to have it be an exchange, because sometimes we learn things from other people, right? When I've been in healer clinics with other healers, a lot of times we'll do a thing and we'll say, what do you do to protect your energy before, during, and after a healing session? And we all share and we learn new tools, right? So see this mostly as there's no right or wrong answer. And if you're not doing anything, to not feel any shame or sadness around that, just to say, oh, this is something new I'm exploring. So if we could go back into groups and just share, what are some of the ways that you connect with land, honor land, ask permission of land, seek guidance from land, partnership with land. And it's different for different people. So again, just to honor that everybody's coming at this from a different place and there's no right or wrong answer. How's that sound?
Good.
Okay.
I've got almost the same breakout rooms ready, but a couple switches. So you might have someone new in your group, a little bit of variety, and I'll do the same amount of time. Oh, thank you, Erin, for putting a better quote of the questions there in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with each other. Let me go back to gallery so I can see everybody. There we go. So I wanted to share just in our closing a little bit about the importance of the ceremony with Nicaragua and my ancestors that happened just last November. It was really, it's still really fresh and new, and I'm still integrating a lot of it. So I mentioned that I had wanted to ask for an ancestor who was a good land steward if I was going to be in these particular roles that I was asked to be in, both with RHI and with the land here that we're supposed to start a land trust for. And when I did that, my great grandfather, Fidel Ma mentioned him, came forward. And so I knew some of his story, but it only came out, the beginnings of the story only came out when my father came to visit me after I did the Peace and Dignity Journeys in 2012. And I asked for lots of stories around the family and where they grew up and things like that. I was recording a lot of things. And my dad had remembered at that time the story of a lot of sadness because the family lost this big tract of land. And he told me a little bit about it and kind of how these uncles had kind of cheated out their siblings from that land. And there was trauma and suffering around that. And that was kind of the extent of what he told me, that the older brothers of my grandmother had kind of stolen this land that their father had meant for all of their siblings. And as you know, as the time approached last year around the land, and they said you have to do healing work around that. They said you need to ask your father for more details. It's far more serious than you realize. And so, you know, in kind of the bigger story, what happened was my great-grandfather Fidelmo was a good steward of land, and he was hired by a lot of people of wealth with farms to be stewards of their land, so that he would manage the land, the relationship with the land, the people that were working on the land, and he was known as a very good steward that way. And so there was a particular wealthy family, the Cabrera family, that had him on as kind of the caretaker, the steward of the land. And when he retired from working with them, they were so grateful to him that they offered him a big lump of money to go buy his own land for him and his own family. And that was kind of unheard of in that time. Like wealthy families don't usually do stuff like that, but they really appreciated the depth of relationship and stewardship that he held around land. And so he bought a big tract of land, and he was guided by listening to the land, listening to spirit. It was a long strip of land that was large, and he built his home on one side of it. And then on the other side, he was guided by spirit to gift that other end of the land to an indigenous family. And he did that for a couple of reasons. Spirit told him to do that. And he also knew it was a good idea to have people kind of watching both edges of the land. But he told that family, Spirit has told me you get to live here as long as you want to. And, you know, this is for your families, and our families will, you know, be on this land together. He had a first marriage, which was the result of my grandmother Mariana being born, and many, many other children from that first marriage. And that wife had died, and he had remarried to a woman named Angela. So he was in his second marriage when this happened. And he had a baby daughter named Dora. It was just a little baby. And so when he died, Angela and Dora were living on that land with him. And one of the things that happened was some of his older sons were really concerned about losing that land. They wanted that land for themselves. So they had a whole conversation with their siblings saying, like, let's try and invent some debt so that we can kick this widow and her baby off the land, and we keep it all for ourselves. And so they did that, and all of that was a lie. And then also one of the uncles convinced the other siblings, let's put all of the property in my name so that I can do all the legal things I need to do, so we keep it for ourselves. You know, but I'm going to need kind of power of attorney and all these things so we can kick that indigenous family off the land, and so we can kick the widow and the baby off the land. And so the siblings agreed to that, which shouldn't have to begin with, but they did. And so as soon as he got legal power over everything, he not only kicked off the widow and the baby half sister to these guys, he also wanted to kick the indigenous family off. And they said, your father said we could stay here forever. And then he said, well, no, he's not here anymore, and I'm in charge now. And in the scuffle and throwing that family off the land, a pregnant woman, indigenous woman, was killed. And of course, that baby was lost too. And the sort of vendetta began on that land between those families, and a lot of violence and hurting each other. And one of the things the land told me is, like, this is about so much more than family trauma in you and in your line. It's about the imprint of that energy on the land. And the people that live there now are not thriving and not doing well because this hasn't been dealt with. And so it's important for you to do that energetic work to clear that heavy karma on the land, so that land can be healthy and the people who are on it are healthy. And then, you know, the other piece was that, like, if you're going to be a steward of land, you need to clear this out of your lineage, the karma of this in your own lineage, because otherwise it will creep into the way you hold the land when you're unconscious, when you're not paying attention. And it's the way that the land can trust you, that it knows you mean to do this the right way. And so I took that in really deeply. And it's so interesting to me because this happened in November. my father and his mother maintained really good relationships with Angela and Theodora because Angela, the second wife, was a good stepmother to my grandmother. She was not okay with all this, but she was a little girl. She didn't have any control over what her older brothers were doing. But she maintained a good relationship with her stepmother and her half sister. And so my father did too. And when they came to from Nicaragua, we were good friends with them. And I was raised knowing Theodora and knowing her whole family, her children, her grandchildren. We were always just raised together. So we did the ceremony in December, and Theodora died in December, like a month later. And when I went to that funeral, I felt my great-grandfather there. He said, "Thank you for taking care of this before she died, because that's the baby that was thrown off that land. And I'm going to help you with the stewardship of land and teaching about these things, about why it's so important to do the karmic and healing work around our relationship with ancestors and relationship with land if we're going to be in right relationship with how we hold land now and how we're going to support future generations to do that too." And so that feels really, just most of us don't know the stories of what our ancestors did on land, right? And the other piece that my Toltec teachers have taught me over and over again is like, you don't actually have to know the details to ask to clear the heaviness and energy. Like that we are the ones that are going to turn and face these energies and say, whatever karma existed in my line around domination, around disconnection from land, around disconnection from ancestors, that I want to offer that to earth to be composted, to be transmuted, so that I'm not carrying that anymore. So future generations are not carrying that anymore. And that it's a gift to us. It's a gift to those ancestors in the ancestor world. It felt like the week before that whole ceremony in November, I could feel my great-grandfather coming to me with this sadness around what his sons had done. And I said, if you need to cry through me, cry through me. And for many days in the shower, I would just cry and cry. And I said, release that. I don't want to carry that. I don't want future generations to carry that. And it's right for you to feel that grief. There's so much grief that is trapped in this part of our body energetically that's from the grief of our ancestors about the things they did and didn't do. And they want us to release, not just for us, but for them too. And a month later at that funeral, I felt him come in and he said, thank you, because she's leaving with less karmic burden from this lifetime because she did that work. And I feel like I can receive her better in the ancestor world because you did that work. And I'm going to help you listen to the land the way I listen to the land. We're going to do that together. And so I share these stories because I think the land really wants us to understand that our trauma, the land's trauma, the ancestral trauma, it's all interconnected. It's not separate from each other. And as people who are working at centers, holding space for people to heal, just to be curious about what that might look like for you. I know that for those of you who want to work in the Racial Healing Initiative, that we want to provide support for this kind of deeper level of work, that what we're talking about is not kind of racial healing, DEI certification, understanding racism at 101 at this intellectual level. This is much deeper. And it's much deeper because we want it to be about all of us being back in relationship with each other at a heartfelt place, and reclaiming our relationship to the land and our ancestors, and reclaiming our relationship to each other. There's so much possibility in this time for bringing about a different vibration on the planet. So I'm just grateful that you're here and curious. And thank you for letting me share some of my story with you. We have about 8 minutes left, so I want to just make space here for whatever is coming up in your heart from this conversation, or a question you might have, or something you want to share about your own experience with land and ancestors that feels relevant and related to this conversation. Like, I want to use the last few minutes for people to share what feels significant on their hearts.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sonia.
I'm wondering, Brenda, I've been told before, and not that this has necessarily been a running theme for me, but that when I have experienced on occasion a lot of grief around things that happened to my mother and my family. This kind of counsel around letting it go, because it's going to be good for you and it's going to be good for others to just to let that go. And I feel so conflicted about it, because I feel like it's too easy to say just let it go, because I feel like others are also ready to move on from this topic. And I guess part of it is it time for that? And has that wounding been addressed and healed, or is it still kind of festering?
Yeah. Thank you for that reflection back. I think as an indigenous and Toltec healer, like one of the things that we talk about, and I've been trained, is like to always hold space for the plática first, for people to be witnessed in the story of the pain and the suffering and the grief, and that it can't really be part of why we're holding so much ancestral grief in our bodies is because we lost our ceremonies of grieving. We lost our safe spaces to talk about our pain and suffering. And so I think our ancestors knew how to clear, because they just had good and bad things that happened to them. Everybody does. And that we had these ways of understanding how to move the feelings, feel the feelings, move through them, and then release. We had ceremonies where people would grieve together and dance and shake and release that to the earth. And because we've lost these ways, our ancestors kind of get trapped in your body and then passed it down over many generations. And so, yes, I think that there is a way that sometimes we talk about the spiritual bypass part, right? Like we just forget about it, which is really different from feeling it, grieving it, and releasing it. I think the release without the proper honoring of the grief is actually not releasing it. It's just keeping it stuffed where it is. So thank you for naming that.
This reminds me of, are you going to go, Larissa?
Thank you, Gay. I want to express appreciation for what we shared today. And one thing that's still alive for me was a little part of your story where you expressed that you and other healers, get together and share, like, what do you do before, during, and after? And my daughter's job during COVID was body retrieval, and she got very serious about her pre, during, and post rituals. And I just wanted to say how wonderful I would feel to continue in community with this group, to do that kind of thing together. I could spend a whole year talking about this, just the questions you put in the prompts today, over and over. And so I just wanted to name that desire that I have, and appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. Me too. I love these conversations. So learning, both from giving, but also receiving from the wisdom and experience of others, is such a gift.
What it called to mind for me was, so on my African side, I've been part of the Orisha tradition. I was given in Nigeria at Oshogbo about 35 years ago or so. But I grew up in a settlement called French Creek, which was where Native Americans and free Blacks had kept safe, away from civilization. So in my Native American side, I was given not the name, but the purpose, spirit healer. So my purpose here is to assist in the healing of our spirits by reconnecting with the land. So how I do that currently is through a building. It's called Song Homes for the Orisha, and it's about as we build these small temples, we learn the songs to the rocks. We learn the songs to the water as we mix the mud to make the adobe. We learn the songs to the forest before we. And did I mention I'm a praise singer in the Orisha? Yes, okay. So my purpose is there. Well, one of the wonderful things was studying and learning from Sobonfu, Some, Malidoma, and Sobonfu, right? Speak about grief and how. So I was educated. I went to university in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, in West Africa, and which is right. Continuous with Burkina Faso, which is where Maridoma and Sobofu are from. And they mentioned, for instance, that every day in a Dagara village, there is a grief ritual that you can join somewhere, right? And to be in a grief ritual with her is both all of this grief, but it transmutes into joy and healing, because there's drumming and singing and everyone is wailing and grieving. Well, we no longer have these types of ceremonies. And I am convinced that one of the reasons why we are having so much violence in our culture is because we have no grief rituals. And grief cannot be done just by going to a therapist. This kind of privatization of our pain does not assist in transforming our culture. And so one of the things that I want to do with my little song homes is to go into communities, and we will build, it'll start with just being a wall, and that will be our grief wall. And it'll just be built out of rocks and adobe and stuff like that, so it can go back to the earth, right? But then we will do the grief ritual in the tradition of the Dagara. But probably,
I'm gonna need to close. Have you wrap up this, because we're
done.
Done. Yes, sorry. No, my heart. Yeah, no. A lot of the folks I work with are people who were trained by both Maladova and Somé, and in partnership with a friend to open up earth shrines at different places, and so that medicine is really important. Thank you. And we should.
Sorry, I went on.
No, it's okay. It's okay, because that's when our spirit takes hold. Yeah. I do want to honor people's time, though. So, and I wanted to make sure that we did a little closing together. And so I'm going to invite you just to rub your hands together, get a little energy going, and to place those hands on your heart. And then I like cacophony, so everybody unmute, actually. It's good to hear each other's voices. Everybody unmute, and then repeat after me. I am loved.
I am loved.
I am a blessing.
I am a blessing.
I am sacred just the way I am.
I am sacred just the way I am.
I have dignity.
I have dignity.
I have wisdom and gifts for the world.
I have wisdom and gifts for the world.
Now that we've spoken that truth to ourselves, we'll speak it to each other. So rub your hands again. Make sure you're on gallery mode. And say out to the people there, you are loved.
You are loved.
You are a blessing.
You are a blessing.
You are sacred just the way you are.
You are sacred
just the way you are.
You have dignity.
You have dignity.
You have wisdom and gifts for the world.
You
have wisdom and gifts for the world.
Thank you for sharing with each other, and to be continued, I'm sure. Blessings to all of you, and gratitude to all your ancestors for making it possible and bringing you here today.
Paul Diaz. Thank you so much, Brenda, and everyone.
Thank you too. It's a joy to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.